Greetings and welcome back to my channel. Today, part one, I'm going to read from the first of my series, Chaos and Creation, The Coming of Darkness. This is the foreword to part one. Some people say, oh, you shouldn't write a foreword, you should start your first chapter with a bang. And well, there's a lot of advice out there about how to start a book. What I would say, this foreword was in fact a passage further into the book, and as I was writing it I realized that it had illustrative powers that would locate the reader within the world that I was creating. Sorry, I must remember to look at the lens. Within the world that I'm creating, and I thought it was a good idea. Well, the intention in this foreword is to give a sense of the coming threat to the area of land I've called the Middle Marcher Lands, which also implies that I have a geographical image in my head, which is something perhaps I should talk to first. When I started, you see I've got no hair, which is why I keep my hat on, because I'm sat by the window and it's winter. Anyway, one of the most important parts of writing epic fantasy for me is that I have in my head an idea of the size scale of the world, and it needs to have a recognizable geographical economics, layout, mountainous, needs to have coastal, there needs to be access to cities and towns, there need to be rivers along which goods can be taken. So it needs to be a world, well, for me at least, because my writing is based on the Western European tradition of epic fantasy. It needs to be based in a world, for me, again, medieval, classic fantasy world. So I need to understand the geography, the topography, so I can visualize as I write where these characters are, where these people come from, and why they are like they are. So the geography isn't that difficult. It's essentially based on my own experience of the world. You know, there's a large landmass, there's a sea, there are rivers, and there's an island, essentially speaking, off the coast. So I was thinking, because my story starts in the Western region, and the threat emerges from the east, and it's fairly early in the tale, I wanted to introduce the idea that things were already happening in the east before things started to be impacted in the west, which is based on a fairly realistic interpretation of how things work. You know, a threat starts a long distance away and doesn't feel like a problem, but as it approaches and one starts to understand more as information comes in, then you're more likely to get a reaction, a response, usually based on fear or threat to one's safety and economic status. So this scene, and that's another point worth mentioning, when I write scenes as if I was writing a play or a movie. Just have a quick slurp of the coffee. So I visualize everything, and then it's probably worth mentioning how I do that. I think it's as much as anything to do with the way I'm wired, I guess, because I have spoken to some people who don't have that ability. So it's not particularly skill, it's just the way I'm made. So I visualize and I talk about what I'm looking at. So I have some idea, excuse me. I have some idea where I want the characters to be and when, and I watch them. I watch them perform, and as the characters become more complex, eventually the characters start to tell me how they're going to react in those different circumstances. It does sound odd, but it's true, and that works for me. So I needed a landscape, a world, a landscape, geographical place, a location. It needs to be vast because it's a big story I wanted to write. I wanted to write all these different peoples and aspects and motivations. So a big landscape, excuse me. And I wrote this passage further in the book, and then I realized, actually, if I put it at the start of the book, it might, in a land far, far away, the darkness was stirring. And as the reader, you know about it before our main protagonist. Well, at least with a couple of exceptions, which will be revealed throughout the book. So I'll start by reading what I could refer to as the foreword rather than a prologue. I think that's probably the correct way to think about it. So hopefully it won't take too long because I don't want to bore you to tears, but we'll have a quick word about how it impacts on the story for the rest of the book afterwards. In a remote eastern region of the Empire, Imperial Lancers sat patiently in their saddles, sweat evaporating under the scorching sun. They watched as the shadows of the day grew long. The gentle breathing of their patient horses and the occasional creak of oared leather were the only sounds to break the silence, until, "Look, there they are!" The cry echoed across the valley to where a solitary black warhorse had burst from the dark shadows of a narrow ravine. "I can only see one rider, sir." The lieutenant raised his hand to shield his eyes from the setting sun as he peered into the fading light. "Can you see who?" "Wait, there's something else, sir." A dark shadow appeared to reach out from the steep black chasm, as if trying to retrieve the fleeing cavalry officer. "My God, I think it's the captain, sir. I've never seen anything like." Down in the valley, their captain was stood in his stirrups, his voice almost drowned out by the sound of galloping hooves. He leaned forward to shout encouragement into the ear of his fleeing mount. "Gah! Come on, lad. If we give up now, we'll both end up as dog meat." Looking up, he caught sight of a familiar silhouette set against the deep red sky. Elite mounted warriors, his comrades. Yes, there they are. In the name of Rome, get those lancers down here. Kicking his spurs into the flanks of his fleeing charger, he turned to look over his shoulder. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Dog soldiers. Dog soldiers were indefatigable. Working as a pack, they relentlessly hunted down their quarry. So even though his sturdy warhorse was beginning to pull away, he knew it was only a matter of time before it would become exhausted and fail. The captain's eyes narrowed as he desperately scanned the horizon before him. "Yes," he hissed through clenched teeth, as amid a cloud of amber dust a phalanx of galloping cavalry horses cascaded down the hillside and along the valley floor towards him. 50 white-plumed lancers, steel helmets glinting in the light of the setting sun, lowered their lances and closed in on the enemy. "That's my boys, come on. These wild dog won't know how to handle a full-on cavalry charge." A crunching thud echoed across the valley as the Atarian captain pulled hard on his reins. Bringing his sturdy warhorse around, he drew his saber, and waving it wildly around his head, he charged to join the fray as frantic dog shoulders crashed like broken waves against the rock of imperial might. Little break there, a little slurp of coffee. So hopefully you see that you've got this thing. We've got an imperial force, so that the empire is at work. It's in the far eastern reaches. It's in the far eastern reaches of the old empire. This group of cavalry have been sent to respond to intelligence where there have been dark goings on in the region. The captain's gone into the mountainous region, the Cracked Mountains, up a dark ravine, to explore, because on the other side of the Cracked Mountains is the Dark Wastes. That's where the bad guys live. And so the Empire's doing its duty. It's trying to protect the Empire's territories from incursions from enemy forces. So the captain has taken a group of men into the dark ravine, the pass, and he's left his majority of his lancers waiting for him, and they've been waiting a long time. You know, you get this sense, I hope, that they've been sat in their saddles a long time. The sun is beginning to set in the beginning, and they're starting to give up hope when he appears. So suddenly, boom, there's an adrenaline pumping, again, I assume, adrenaline pumping action scene as the dog soldiers crash like broken waves against the rock of Imperial might. Excuse me, as I continue. The ensuing carnage was inevitable. Deadly lances held in practice hands drove through the hard, bony frames of the dog soldiers, and as they fell, they were trampled under the hooves of battle-hardened horses. Though lean and durable, dog soldiers were not warriors. They were barely men. They were pale, corrupted souls driven by hunger and fear, sent to Rome to harry and harass, not to stand toe to toe with hard steel. Then we go on to describe the consequences to these dog soldiers. Disembodied limbs tumbled through the air in a mist of blood, and dark flesh-splattered steel flashed in the fading light. I have to say, I don't hold back on the gore, so if you're of a nervous disposition, don't go any further. But I'm also interested in, excuse me, even in a fantasy, that there are harsh realities of war, and people die horribly and bloodily. And I don't shy away from that, although I do try not to dwell on the gory details if I can help it, but I think it's important to say that this is to portray the idea that this is a violent and bloody encounter, especially for the dog soldiers. So, reading on. Seeing the enemy was undone, the lieutenant began to rally his men to the sound of the regimental bugle as his relieved captain pulled up alongside him. Whoa, Rotan, what a sight for sore eyes you are. Excellent timing, my friend. Turn to the page. Bando, I'm very relieved to see you. I had almost given up hope. Rotan looked back across the valley as the last of the surviving dog soldiers disappeared back into the dark chasm. What of Colour Sergeant Drukba and the others? So he's referring to the group of men that Captain Bando took with him into the dark chasm. Captain Bando looked down at the ground and shook his head. Again, very visual. All killed or worse, poor thoughts. He gazed back towards the dark ravine from where only a few moments ago he had emerged in fear for his life. He recounts. We got in close. Looking up again to hold the gaze of his lieutenant. We were attacked. It was bad. It's not looking good, old man, he goes on to explain. They're swarming like ants on the far side of the breach as we speak. At least one anarchy attack group. That's the battle formations that the dark forces use. More of that will be explained later. This time next year, they will be infecting this valley like the pox. Rotan shook his head as he turned his horse around. With your permission, Captain, we need to get back to warn the city. So, now then, interestingly, quick slurp of coffee. I think there's quite a lot of information in there. We know something's going on in the eastern region of the Empire on the dark side of the cracked mountains. The Imperial Lancers have been sent out, and they suspect that an invasion is pending, and Captain Bando refers to an anarchy attack group is forming on the far side. And so there are concerns because further south is the capital of the Imperial, the capital city of the Empire. And so in their minds, the capital city is is likely to be attacked by this force sometime in the foreseeable future. Now, to add to that, I would say what I think might come as a surprise to the reader, because this is a fantasy book after all, and some of what I've written there could apply to a historical fantasy, perhaps. There's not necessarily fantastical peoples, although dog soldiers, that's a kind of, all the inhabitants of my books are human in origin, by the way. That's another story. But the dog soldiers have been poorly neglected, badly treated, and evolved into this hardened, mindless, roaming, scavenging military adventurers. These are what Bando and his small group of lancers encountered when they went into the ravine. So as they start to muster to return to the city, we switch to another scene: wolves. At the same moment, on the other side of the valley, high up in the snow-capped mountains, a large grey wolf watched and listened. She had seen the two tribes clash in bloody conflict in the shallow valley beneath her. Now she turned to address the massive black wolf, waiting patiently by her side. So it has begun, Pack Brother. The huge wolf stared out at the fading light, nodding his head slowly. Indeed, Pack Mother. I have what remained, she says, have what remained of the fleeing dog soldiers been destroyed? Yes, Pack Mother, answers the large black wolf. They were torn apart as they re-entered the mountain pass. Then we have done what we can to ensure the news of this encounter will be delayed at least. The wolves don't want this information to be too widely known about. It is as we feared, Pack Brother. The enemy prepares their war machine to break through this narrow pass. This time, their invasion will be unstoppable, so the wolves know more than the Imperial Lancers have learned. Descending from their vantage point, they joined a large gathering comprising several packs of armoured werewolves. This was their terrain, and they had expert knowledge of how to use it to their advantage. Scattered along the snow-covered rocks and boulders of the high pass, the impatient wolves watched through narrowed eyes as Pack Mother Wolpin stepped up to address them. Pack brothers and sisters, tonight you have tasted Havokian blood. As one, the fierce wolves raised their large heads and began to howl, filling the chill air with their hot breath, creating a billowing cloud of deafening sound that echoed down the narrow ravine. What would you have us do, Pack Mother? Turn the page. So, this is a completely different perspective. These are the great beasts, the wolves, armoured wolves, werewolves. They've observed what's been going on in the valley, watching the Imperial cavalry slaughter these Havokian dog soldiers that have come through the pass which the wolves oversee. The wolves come from the Crack Mountains. They know the terrain well, and they're the first to know when something's going on. Wolpin turned to her loyal servant. It is the beginning. The fire of destiny is ignited. We must await the news from the council. Until then, we continue to harry the enemy for as long as we can. Now go. Move with haste. Inflict maximum damage on your enemies. May the harmony of Mother Nature be with you. So the wolves have got their own agenda. They've witnessed this, and they've got their own agenda and their own understanding of the circumstances. And finally, in this introduction, unnatural forces. We're back with the Lancers now. They're clearing up the dead and loading the wounded onto their horses. Later that evening, on the far side of the valley, the wounded had been tended to, and Captain Bando had given the order for the dead to be laid across their mounts. Climbing stiffly onto his warhorse, he gave the order to begin the return to the Holy City. Once on high ground, the heads of some of the cavalrymen were nodding with exhaustion as they orientated themselves south towards Ataria being the capital city of the empire. Captain Banda watched bleary-eyed before turning to gaze back towards the cracked mountains. His lieutenant, clearly concerned, pulled up beside him. The men are all tired. It will be dark soon. We should get on. Continuing his gaze, Banda replied, I know, it's not safe here. We will rest at first light. Are you all right, old friend? Rotan asked. Banda smiled and turned towards him. I knew you would wait. Rotan nodded, smiling grimly. It was touch and go. Raising his hand to cup his ear, Banda listened. Can you hear that? Rotan stared eastward towards the snow-topped mountains. Wolves? Yes. Banda remembered the massive wolves he had seen high up on the ridge as his expedition entered the steep chasm. Then something in the distance caught his eye. What in the name of Roan? A large, shapeless object appeared to float silently across the valley floor before suddenly veering off towards them. It's coming this way. By all that's holy, what is it? The two young officers wrestled to control their terrified horses as the ominous black shadow soared above them to the sound of beating wings. A moment later, the air had become still as they watched the cold black shadow disappear towards the western horizon. So, that's the introduction to book one. Hopefully you'll see that there are a number of viewpoints there already. We've got the empires. The empires, I really must say, I keep meaning to look into the lens. I'll get better at this. The empires got their own agenda. They need to protect their land, the hard-fought land. The empire is old and crumbling, but they still are a powerful force in the Middle Marcher lands. They sent their imperial troops to investigate. Captain Banda's taken a section of men into the Dark Ravine, and he's the only one to come back. His loyal Lieutenant Rotan waited. Together, they managed to destroyed the poor Hervokian dog soldiers who've got their own ruthless agenda, which is largely to stay alive and eat everything that they can kill because they don't get fed or looked after. They killed them and they are just tidying up, ready to return to Ataria, their capital city. As they're doing that, we go to a scene where the wolves are on the high mountain ridges. They've been watching this go on and they reveal their own understanding of what's happening. They know something's going to come and that the dark forces are threatening, and they need to report this to their own council. Then, right at the end of that scene, a dark shadow emerges to cross the valley floor and sweep across towards the west. And what that dark shadow is and how it threatens the west becomes a feature of the next few chapters. And so it is, we go to chapter 1, which I shall be discussing with you in the next YouTube video, which I hope you'll join me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like it, give me a thumbs up, perhaps subscribe, and I'll continue to produce these videos and hopefully you'll find it useful. What would make it perhaps more interesting would be if you were to ask me any questions, share any thoughts and opinions that I can use to help me with this venture. Like I say, I'm not looking to give you any advice, but I can tell you how it's been for me, and maybe you'll find that useful. So storytellers, thank you very much for tuning in, and that's goodbye for me for now.